In part 4, we're now going to move on and look at some of the applications of mindfulness for performance enhancement. And so what we see here in this slide, these two look very, very mindful. You know, if you take a close look at these two, they really exhibit qualities of attentiveness, curiosity, what we've been calling mindfulness. And this is actually an innate quality in humans. So when we're little, we're naturally curious about everything. But of course, as we go through life, we become familiar with things, we start taking things for granted, we start to relate to our world through concepts and ideas, and that curiosity naturally starts to diminish. So here are some pictures of being at the beach with your friends, following your favourite football or basketball team. This is a typical scene these days, being out to dinner, a bunch of people sitting around on their phones, even on dates, right? And so more and more where technology, of course, is contributing to this, but just generally the busyness of life, the stresses of life, and this idea that we should be able to multitask is contributing to this mentality where we're not paying attention, or even identifying something which has been called attention deficit trait. So unlike ADHD, which is a psychological disorder and a combination of biological and environmental factors, ADT is purely environmental. It's about having too much stimulation, trying to do too much all at once. It's a chronic fight and flight response where we just feel overwhelmed, we can't think clearly, we can't plan, black and white thinking, not a very effective way of operating in the world. As Albert Einstein said as well, any man who can drive safely while kissing a pretty girl is not giving the kiss the attention it deserves. And I think this beautifully sums up what life can be when we're not trying to do 100 things at once. In 2005, the BBC reported on some research from Hewlett-Packard where they found that workers who were constantly distracted by phone calls, emails, knocks on the door, trying to do 5 things at once, experienced a measurable reduction in their IQ that was actually about twice as bad as if they were stoned. So we're really not working, studying at our best when we're trying to operate in this way. And it turns out that multitasking is actually an illusion. The brain processes information in serial, which means one thing after another. We don't process complex information in parallel. So that means if you're driving and you're talking on your mobile phone, even on the hands-free, your attention's going from the driving to the conversation, back to the driving, backwards and forwards, and it can cycle between them so quickly that it seems like we're doing multiple things simultaneously. But actually we're not. We're always focusing on one thing or the other, and that's why if you're driving and talking on the phone and someone jumps out in front of your car, more likely to have a crash. And actually every time we switch our attention from one thing to another, there's a very brief period, it's called the attentional blink, where we're not paying attention to anything at all. The attentional systems of the brain actually go offline for between 0.2 to 0.5 a second. The more stressed we are, the longer we go offline for. And of course this has implications because if we're studying and we've got our work in front of us and we've got multiple tabs open and we're checking our phone and there's music playing and we're switching our attention backwards and forwards, we're potentially losing half a second each time we switch our attention. And that would start to add up. You do that 120 times and you've lost a minute, right? And that's not a minute on Facebook when you should be studying, but that's actually a minute getting from your study to Facebook and back again. And of course, the research shows as well that if we stop and check an email or Facebook, it takes over a minute on average to get our attention fully back on what we're doing. And you probably know that experience of stopping and doing something, getting back to work and thinking, what was I doing again? And if we do that every 5 minutes in a 40-hour work week, we actually waste 8.5 hours of dead time where we're not paying attention to anything at all. So it's a very inefficient way of working. If you think we're making this up, here's a really simple experiment just to bring this to life. So just say to yourself silently in your head the letters A to Z as fast as you can. And now the numbers 1 to 26. And now I want you to really simply switch between letters and numbers. So A1, B2, C3, D4, all the way to Z26. And straight away, you're going to notice a really obvious slowing down, right? And probably you lost track after about D or E if you're really good, right? And that's the attentional blink, which is taking place all the time, but we often just don't notice it. And letters and numbers, that's some pretty simple attention switching. If you're driving your car, like I mentioned before, and talking on your phone, it makes us 4 times more likely to crash within 5 minutes of having the conversation. And it's like being 0.08 in a driving simulator test. And if we're texting while we're driving, then we become 164 times more likely to crash, because then our attention's not on the driving and our eyes aren't even on the road. And so obviously the implications for this are to unitask, to learn to actually focus on one thing at a time, to notice when the mind's wandered off and just come back to what we're doing. And so in the next section, part 5, we're going to talk about some of the applications of mindfulness.